Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Hal Bradley. I would like to ask us, each and every one of you, that if you enjoyed these shows, please hit like, share, and subscribe after you view the show. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, world. Welcome to another episode of the Crisis Victory Show. Today, my co-host Pete Turner and I wanted to give a review, an outline, if you will, of my life story. And the purpose of doing this, even though so many of you have heard segments of it, we want to go ahead and categorize it for you so you'll have a clearer understanding of just exactly where my journey began and how my journey ended to where I'm at today in life in the ministry. So without further ado, Pete, good morning. Good to see you, brother.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Yeah.
I guess let's start at the beginning. What were you before you got in trouble for smoking? Talk about that kid who, right before he gets in trouble for smoking, what was he up to? What was the future for Hal?
Yeah, good one. Yeah, at the time, it was 1969. I was in the 10th grade in high school, and myself and two friends were in the bathroom there, and we were sharing a cigarette when the teacher walked in, and we got nailed. And at that time of my life, I was nothing but a standard high school student. I had played football. I'd been in various other curriculars and activities in school. So I was a good kid. You know, I wasn't anybody that had any bad things going on at all in my life at that time. Just like I said, a normal kid growing up in Edmonds, Washington, a very normal community just north of Seattle, Washington. And yeah, it was everybody that's our age now, that's in our early 70s, mid 70s. We all remember the 60s. And remember, that was a revolutionary time. The Vietnam War was going on, lots of protesting going across America with regard to that. It was also the time of Flower Power, Summers of Love, rock concerts going on. It basically the invented time of rock concerts. So, yeah, it was a revolutionary moment. But anyway, getting back to what we're trying to create today, when I got kicked out of school back in '69 for smoking, during that time, Pete, they would keep you out for a half a year. You lost a whole semester for offenses like that. And my mother was raising myself, my younger brother and sister. My older brother was in Vietnam during that time. And she just didn't want me wandering the streets. She was a full-time worker at a dry cleaners and just didn't have time to sit on the kids at all. So she had a friend that owned 11% of the Anaconda de Mexico Mining Corporation on the Durango-Zacatecas border in central Mexico. Well, he flew up, and they spent the night talking about my situation. And the following day, I packed a bag, and he took me with him, and we flew into Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Mexico, where we were met by two of the mine workers that took us up to the state of Durango the following morning. When I arrived, I ended up in a village, or about 2 kilometers out of the village at the mining camp, but the village was just a couple hundred people. It was a very small, very impoverished community. Absolutely something I was not prepared to go to see. I had never been in an environment like that in my life. Not one person in the village spoke English. I'd never even heard Spanish before. I was from Washington State in the 60s, and at that time we didn't have a Latino community like we do today. So it was a real trial right from day one. But the bodyguard that was assigned to me, his name was Senior Mimo. He spoke fluent English. So I had an interpreter and someone that was there for my protection and safeguarding while I was in the country. Unbeknownst to me, they mined zinc and silver. That was the front, but that's exactly what this was. It was a front operation for heroin production and marijuana production. The Chowari Indians grew the marijuana in the mountains above the mining camp where I was based at. And the fields, the poppy fields, were all alongside the dirt roads that went for several kilometers from the village outline area into the back recesses of the fields, if you will, that were behind it. And at that time, I went from riding a Schwinn bicycle with a banana seat and handlebars to riding a burro named Pepito on the mountain trails that were in the canyons that were surrounding and encompassing the area that I was living at. And I remember going up in the mountains, and I would be riding along these fields that were just acres and acres of poppies, and it was so beautiful. And I'm a kid in my innocence. I had no idea that the people that were out there were cutting the sap off the bulbs and harvesting the raw opium base for the production of heroin. And at first, they were real careful about me being out there. I was under constant watch and constant guard and constant observation. And the Chowari Indians would come down off the mountainside to see and identify just who the hell this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid was out in the middle of nowhere. And ultimately, as the months unveiled, I developed friendships with them and was able to go up into their camps and become a part of that part of the civilization that was totally foreign to me. The people that were out working in the fields that were harvesting the sap out of the poppy bulbs ultimately would wave at me. They felt comfortable in the knowing of who this kid was. And sometimes I would actually have a roadside lunch with them, come off the trail. They would flag me over and invite me to sit and eat with them. And this was primarily really young people, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 years of age, and older people. There was nobody there that I remember observing that was like a middle-aged class type of people. And I remember the concern, if you will, that was granted me by the people there, because there was a warning that if anything were to ever happen to me, that there would be a great retaliation. The man that owned the percentage of the mining corporation who had befriended my mother was an organized crime connected individual out of Santa Rosa, California. He had ties to the Sicilian families all the way back to the East Coast. He was a powerful man. And my mother had been his friend for over 20 years. She was his mistress, and they really loved each other. He was a great man to the family, but he always knew that I was a little bit different than my brothers and my sisters. And that's why he made the decision to take me down there and incorporate me into that type of a criminal environment, if you will. Well, needless to say, Pete, this became the turning point of my life. I had hit a crossroad, and as the months started to unveil, I developed friendships down in that part of Mexico. There was an organized crime family, very powerful, that controlled that region. I'm not going to say their name. I never gave that up to the feds or nobody once I made the decision to work for my country. But the bottom line is this: I was able to attach to a kid my age who later became a boss of his families when I came back after my military service. And so I remember spending that summer and into the fall with him. We were together every weekend. They would actually come and pick me up in a truck and take me out to their ranch, which was lavish, just beautiful. And he was always under armed guard wherever he went, because he was a potential target, because their family, of course, had enemies. They were a very powerful criminal organization. But when I left the village to come back stateside, my brother had been wounded in Vietnam. I wanted to come up and be with him. I was very concerned about what I was going to walk back into and see my brother. So before I left the village, they said, "Aquí en su corazón vive la sangre de la ciudad." They said, "In your heart pumps the blood of the village. Someday, come and return to us." So I went back to Seattle, Washington. My brother was in the Bremerton Naval Hospital at the time, and I remember going on that ward, Pete, and this is 69, 70, so I'm probably off a year somewhere in this calendar, but you get the idea. I walked on that ward, and I saw all of these young men that had combat-related injuries from Vietnam, and I became really angry. I couldn't justify in my mind's eye why these wonderful, decent guys were all laying there with so many horrific combat-related injuries. I spent a couple of days there with my brother, and then I went back to Edmonds, dropped out of school immediately. I wasn't going back to high school. I went to the community college, filed for a GED, and got it. In the fall of 1971, I took my oath 2 weeks after I was 17 years old, and I entered into the United States Army. Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic, Fort Polk, Louisiana, Tigerland for AIT, Fort Benning, Georgia for my paratrooper school, and then I went overseas to Germany, where I did about a year and a half or a little longer. After I ATS'd out of the military, I enrolled in Sacramento. I stayed down in California. I enrolled in Sacramento and went to the college there, the city college. And the fall of the year came by, and it was winter break. And I thought, what the hell? I think I'm going to go down to Walterio, go visit my friends in my village and see what's going on. So I loaded up my car. I drove down to Walterio, Mexico, and I got there, and it was tons of hugs and handshakes and tears, and everybody was glad to see me. And of course, I was speaking Spanish by then. I had learned it during my time staying in Mexico as a kid. And my compadre, my compañero, my friend that is now actively involved in what is now turning into an actual cartel. As you know, the creation of the cartel families came in the late 70s, early 80s, when Engel Gallardo Felix brought together the heads of each organized crime family and created the cartels. Uh, and also, that was convinced to bring a specific type of car back to Mexico, and they would cut compartments in it, and we would start packaging kilos of marijuana in the car, and I could start doing runs. So I go back up to college. Spring break comes around. I have a car ready. I go back down to the village. They take the car, put it in a chop shop, and start putting the compartments in there. And uh, the Chari Indians have been selling marijuana to specific people for probably centuries. So here I am, I'm coming down, and the first load was only 80 kilos. It wasn't a big load, but for the Indian villages, that was a significant amount. So I had to seek out another resource as I started developing my runs and getting other people involved. I ended up with two other cars besides myself, other college friends of mine that I got involved in the smuggling and transporting part of the marijuana business. Now you got to realize this is only 1975, 1976, 1977 era. Well, 1979 rolls around. By then, I've been going to Jalisco State to a ranch just outside of the city of Guadalajara. I met this guy named Rafael Cara Quintero, and Rafa is the one who did ultimately invent the Sinsemilla strains in Mexico. Very powerful guy and became historically famous. He was involved in kidnapping Special Agent Kiki Camarena back in the early to mid 1980s when all hell broke loose. That's the first time a DEA agent had ever been taken, captured, tortured, and killed. And it unleashed our government on the cartels. And at that time, I was actually down there picking up marijuana. And I got out of there and didn't go back to Mexico for 8 or 9 months because we waited for the heat to cool down. It was so explosive what had happened. And Rafael, he brought the whole thing down on top of all of them. The exposure became intensified. The publicity the United States government was putting into the news media sources and stuff was really outlining the problem that we're now seeing in Mexico. You have to realize, too, that around 1979, 1980, I'm not exactly sure again, folks, but right around that era, cocaine was introduced to us. Usually the Medellin drug cartel was running stuff through Florida. They had Griselda working out of there, who was their representative, and a few other people that grew at that time in it. But they were taking lots of losses and lots of hits. So some of the Mexican cartel families started sending a guy named El Chapo. And by the way, El Chapo, I met during that time when I was down there doing marijuana business. He was in Guadalajara, although he was from the town of La Tuna over in Sinaloa State and the bordering state. He was actively involved in the industry and the business with Rafael Cara Quintero and all of that crowd. So, here, the first time I met Chapo was 42 years ago. I was 28, he was 26. And like I said, actively involved in transporting marijuana. It was after that time that El Chapo got involved in the cocaine business. He actually went to El Rio Negro, just outside of Medellin, sat down with Don Pablo Escobar and negotiated a cocaine trade coming into through the Mexican channels and through the various cartel controlled family regions down there. But, Engel Gallardo, Felix Gallardo, who was the Don of all the Dons, had deals with Pablo and later had deals with the Cali cartel, the Ochoa family. But that's kind of getting ahead of this all. My part in the story is this. One year we're smuggling marijuana. All of a sudden a light switch turns and we're bringing cocaine into the United States. By then I've picked up a plane. I'm flying into Arizona, in an area where the Yaqui Indians have a tribal reservation that's half in Arizona and half in the state of Sonora, Mexico. So I had access and permission to fly through their canyons to get myself into northern Sonora And about 200 clicks north of Hermosillo, we had a ranch out there where the guy took a bulldozer and bladed out an airstrip for us. So I was at this, by then I'm flying cocaine in the States, but I was developing markets up in the state of Washington, into Canada, into Alaska, and we were growing and expanding. The cocaine sells itself so fast. It was just amazing. Not at all like the marijuana business. And the money went from being in tens of thousands to being in multi-millions per deal. So I was moving 250 to 350 kilos of cocaine at that time, uh, per load, per shipment coming into the region. I've relocated now back to Washington State. I had just come out of Folsom Prison. I did a 3-year stint in California, 86 to 89 for cocaine trafficking sales. Wanted to break away from it, Pete. So I took myself up to Washington State, moved out of Sacramento after living there 16 years. And they came up and they found me. They reattached with me, let me know that you're not walking away from a damn thing, and reactivated, put me back in the business. Now that was in 1990. By 91, I became the target of the Department of Justice with the multi-federal agency task force formed, dubbed the title Operation Northern Exposure. They realized that cocaine, the amounts of cocaine were now coming into that part of the United States in a much larger capacity than they had anticipated or expected. And hell, at that time, brother, they had no idea how much we were bringing through there. But see, where am I at with that? Anyway, bottom line is this. I'd finally made what I wanted to make out of it. I was done of worrying about getting shot and killed, getting captured, getting arrested. I just didn't need it in my life. I had recently married, had a child, had already had all my real estate holdings, multiple companies. I was set for life. And so I decided to fly down to Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, and sit down with the bosses that were involved with me. And this is now the Sinaloa drug cartel. And they were the most powerful cartel. I know the Arellano Felix family. I knew Ramon Arellano Felix when he was 7 years old down in Mexico. But they controlled the Tijuana corridor, moving anywhere from 15 to 20 metric tons of cocaine a month through that corridor. And then Chapo, of course, had Jalisco. He had part of Jalisco. He had all of Sinaloa, and then he had part of the Sonoran territories up there, too. By then, he was digging tunnels, running it under the border underground and moving that way, moving just unbelievable amounts of cocaine into the United States. And the last time I saw Chapo was about 3 months before I walked in 1993. I was required to come down to a formal wedding in the city of Culiacan. So I took my wife with me and we flew down to the wedding, and I'm sitting at the table of bosses. She's sitting across the plaza with all the wives and mistresses over where she was supposed to be. And then in the wedding table was in the upper front, just in front of the band, and they had Los Tigres de la Norte playing at this wedding, a very famous Mexican band. So obviously a wealthy, powerful family. And these guys walk in, and they walk in with AK-47s, and the music stops and everybody's quiet. And they come through and they circle around the plaza, and then they go back out. And a few moments later, El Chapo walks in. And when Chapo came in, he walked straight up to the wedding table, presented a gift to the family, paid his respects, and then came over to the table of bosses where I was seated as a guest and friend. And I remember one of the guys, I'm not going to say their names. It's too, some of them are not in prison. Some of them are not dead. I'm not going to hang myself out any further. But needless to say, one of them that I was working closely with in the cocaine business stood up to El Chapo and said, "This is our friend from the Pacific Northwest." Then Chapo's looking at me and he goes, "I remember you. I remember you from Guadalajara." He goes, "Yeah." And he gives me a hand and a hug shake. And he's going, "This is good. This is great." And all these guys at the table never knew that I knew El Chapo, that I had met him and worked around him in earlier years. So it kind of really upgraded and upticked my credibility with them. Well, it was, let's see, that was early 93, I believe, because it was 93 when I finally made the decision after going down there to get out of the business forever. I was told no problem. I could turn it over to people that they were already networking with and I could walk away. Well, I got back home, Pete, and that night a van was sitting in my driveway with 350 kilos of cocaine and 2 soldados waiting for my arrival from the SeaTac airport. Immediately told them, I said, look, we're heated up here federally. Get that the hell out of here. I'll take the brunt. I'll take it. I'll deal with it. Just go. Get the load out of here. The following morning, I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office. I said, I'm Hal Bradley. And they just went, oh, my God, it's Hal Bradley. The primary target of Operation Northern Exposure just walked into the U.S. Attorney's office. And at that point, I had to do I had a real powerful attorney with me, Murray Gooderson of Culp, Gooderson and Grader. He's infamous. He only takes high profile cases. And he sat there to negotiate the deal with me. And they said, well, listen, you guys go out here. We're going to make some calls. And a couple hours later, we returned after lunch and they took us into this conference room, Pete. And it had a conference table that was so long, it looked like it had a vanishing point. I kid you not. And then all these agency people came in from the various agencies that had been systemically involved with the Operation Northern Exposure case. And I'm talking ATF, DEA, U.S. Customs, IRS, CIA, NSA, name it. There was just so many of them. And at the other end was the U.S. attorney. And he says, okay, we need you to statement out. So at that point, I confessed. And in that instant, I could have been taken into custody immediately and gone for life because I was already kingpin status. I was conspired to more than 500 kilos of cocaine. And at that quantity level, you're done. That's it. You're done. And I said, well, how about this? I came here because they're not going to let me out of this life that I've put myself into. And I'm willing to go to war against it. And I'm here for one specific reason. I'm not powerful enough to do that. I need to do this through your agencies. So they excluded us at that. By that time, they had 2 officers with me. They weren't going to let me go because I had confessed. Put me in a room, and a few hours later, this really cool guy from U.S. Customs comes in. And instead of having to fill out a blue sheet, I filled out a green sheet, which means I'm not going into custody. I'm going to be a cooperating source for the Department of Justice. Suffice to say, the next year and a half before I went in for my final sentencing, I was operational, spending months down in foreign countries at that time, getting involved in other non-related cases. They were basically feeling me out, seeing where my credibility would take them to. And we built some serious cases. We did really well. And by the time that we were done, before I went for sentencing, the cost of cocaine had escalated $2,000 a kilo higher than it was before I'd walked in. That's how much damage we did in the Northwest. And I had the trust and I had the loyalty and I had the faith of the agents that had traveled with me, that had risked their lives with me, that were undercover with me, operational in these countries. Now you've been outside the wire. You understand what happens to men that face life and death environments together. There is a bond that is indescribable to anybody else. And I was no longer looked at as some piece of garbage drug trafficker just trying to make a deal to get himself out of trouble. They realized that I wasn't under arrest. I came in on my own free will to take the Sinaloa cartel factions that I was involved with on. As a result of that, the work expanded, and I've operated in Chicago, I've operated in New Orleans, I operated in Oakland, California, I operated in Tucson, Arizona. And as you know, I'm an author and I've written 12 books. And I have an action adventure novel series based on fictionalized, if you will, because I created the stories. But there's a lot of truth based in these books. And I really behoove the audience to go to drhalbradley.com, look up the books and read them because they are amazing. And they're all dedicated to the victims of the cartels. They're dedicated to law enforcement people that I've worked with. They're dedicated to military spec op teams that were involved in covering me on cases. They're really quite amazing. And, in the 17 years I was operational, during that time, Pete, I would be operating in and out of various U.S. embassies in various countries. And we go down to the cafeteria and I would just come in from the field, just got done debriefing. I'm down there having a bite to eat, and a team would come in. And they would right away, you can look at people that work like us, like you've done it. We just stand out from the crowd. And the guys would come over where we're sitting. Well, over the course of 17 years, I got lots and lots of stories. We'd sit around and talk about stuff that we could talk about. A lot of our work was classified. We never violated those laws, but we would share stories. And I cataloged all that in my memories, and then years later decided to write the action adventure series. So a lot of the stories where I talk about where someone would be talking about a mission uh, in Australia, or a mission in Japan, or a mission, in some other country in Europe or whatever, I would remember that information. And then what I would do is turn it into a fictionalized action adventure story of a man's operating in an undercover capacity with people of that nature. Now, you've had some of my books. You know that you know what I write, so you understand the material and the purpose behind, and that's to honor the victims of the cartels. It's to honor the law enforcement people. It's my way of saying thank you to a government that gave me a shot at getting my life back, even though I faced numerous scenarios where I didn't know I would come out alive. I was kidnapped in Culiacan one time on a 3,000 kilo coke deal with a general in the Mexican army who had possession of the cocaine from the president of Mexico's brother. Later, I was down in El Salvador inserting an intelligence agent into the MS-13 organization, where we were actually captured, and we weren't rescued for almost 2 months. I think it was 7 weeks, where we were moved from dry camp to dry camp every few days. And we were god dang lucky that we weren't executed right off the gate when they grabbed us. But our cover got blown because somebody identified who he was. It wasn't my fault. I had done a stint in Leavenworth Federal Prison in the mid to late 90s after my sentencing. And I had hooked up with a high-ranking MS-13 guy who had mailed a letter down with my information to El Salvador. Somehow, the Salvadorian intelligence agency was able to pick up a copy of that letter or something, as was told to me by 2 agents that met me in Mexico City and recruited me. They said that if we see you have ties to this guy, we need to insert an intelligence agent into the MS-13 organization. You have a direct tie with a high-ranking official that you did time with in federal prison. We'll pay you $75,000 for a 2-day intro into the field on this case. And yeah, sure, I could use the money. But what I did was I violated my contract. I'm a contractor, as you know, and you know what that is. I'm contracting for the Department of Justice, and you have to follow the guidelines and rules. So I stepped out of the guidelines and took this on in my own capacity just to make a quick stack of money. And I almost paid really dearly for it. We were tortured daily, beaten daily, blindfolded and dragged through jungles. We'd be set up in camps, and they would come over and urinate on. Well, they did a lot of things to us. But I remember the day of our rescue. We're both bound. We're on our knees. We're sitting on the ground. We've got bags over our heads. We can't see nothing, but we can hear things. And we heard some kind of motion activity. And at the time, we didn't know how many people had us in captivity, but I believe it was 6 or 7 from what the guys taking me back in the helicopter were mentioning. We heard automatic weapons fire. I rolled over to my side. Manny, that's the agent that was with me. He kind of did the same thing. And then, God, it's just really hard to talk about. It really is. What had happened is there was a water truck that used to bring water to the dry camps where they were moving us. Somehow the intelligence agencies were able to insert a bacteria into the water, and it got all of us really, really sick. I can remember puking with being gagged and blindfolded and laying there on the ground, puking my guts out. And everybody there, all the guards, all of them were hit by this bacterialized water. Well, they came in, they blew everybody away. Everyone was executed. That was what the automatic weapons fire was about. And I remember getting the bag off my head. I think Manny still had his on, but I was on the ground rubbing my head, and I was able to break it loose. And they had a guy running towards Manny and I with a rifle leveled up, and all of a sudden he like half disintegrated. And I remember after I was cut and unbound, wiping parts of him off the side of my face and my shoulder. And God, it was just unbelievable. And I remember being, Manny was put in a separate helicopter. 2 choppers came in. They put me in one, they put Manny in another. I was taken to a CIA black site safe house down there in El Salvador. But when they loaded me in the helicopter, there was a nurse that was on board, and she literally brought me back to reality. I was in such a state of shock and dealing with what had just happened in those moments and those events of active combat. You've been there. You know what I mean? There's a shock that enters into play, if you will. The reality that you're still alive and breathing, I think, is the biggest part of it. But just everything is surreal. But she sat there and she was rubbing my shoulder and telling me that I was going to be okay and that everything, I'm fine, I'm fine. I remember her bringing me down and I couldn't talk. All I could do was weep. I was so stressed out. I just broke down crying. I need a second. It's hard to talk about that. Anyway, Manny was loaded into the other chopper and I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him, but we were in pretty bad shape physically. It took about 2 weeks to get me to where they finally let me go to the United States. I was at the safe site, at the black site, which I know you know what those are. I was there a couple days, medically cleared, and they flew me into Mexico City where the State Department met me, 2 agents of the State Department, and goddamn near hauled me away to prison because I had violated my contract as a contractor. This was a really big situation that I put myself into. And but because of the credibility of the work that I had done, I had learned a lesson. Never step out of your contract agreement with the Department of Justice. Don't ever do that. And I never did again. And as you know, ultimately by 2018, when I finally got out of the business, I had completed 17 years undercover. And anybody out there in the audience that's ever been around that, usually a 4 or 5 year lifespan is about the longest it goes. Anybody working in undercover capacity like that. So doing and doing 17 years, my God, absolutely unheard of. And I was in Sonora, Mexico, 2018. They were moving Chapo into the United States, and I was down there in Ciudad Obregón the day of all of that happening. I was down there as a minister. A friend of mine's mother died, and I came out of Washington State with him. But since I was still activated under my number, I did drop a call. And they said, well, under the Brownsville Act, we'd have to let the ambassador know that we're inserting an agent into Mexico, which is standard. But Mexico is so corrupted to be in a situation to do that. You're putting your life at risk instantaneously just by saying, we're dropping Hal into Sonora,
Next thing on the Hal say, don't say that.
Well, what we did, Pete, and this was legal, is I went down as a minister under my ministerial capacity. I've been a pastor for 25 years now, a long time. And I went down there to help him bury his mother. But if I accidentally run across some information while I'm in there, well, all the better. So that's how I inserted into Sonora State. We were Obregón. All hell broke loose when they grabbed Chapo and they were extraditing him stateside that week. There was the Sinaloa cartel blew into 1,000 different factions. Ciudad Obregón, where we were at, right there on the city block that I was staying at, there was gunfire going on, and they kept me inside that house for a day and a half. Loaded me in the trunk of a car, drove me through 2 cartel checkpoints to get me to the Ciudad International Airport, walked me onto the plane there, Ciudad Obregón, the airport, walked me right on the plane, right on it. And I landed in Tijuana. I notified the agents when I was getting ready to depart the airport in Obregón that I was inbound to Tijuana. So they had a couple agents meet me on the U.S. side. So I got off the plane in Tijuana, got a cab, went to the border, and walked right on through. And on the other side, I got flagged over and spent that night debriefing. The following morning, I said, guys, I'm just too old to do this anymore. I'm out. Now, bear in mind, I'm a contractor. I can quit any damn time I want. I'm not some guy working off a case.
Right.
So that was it for me. I was 65 years old. I'm 70 now. Well, I was 64 years old, but I'm 70 years old now. And let me tell you, that's a young man's game.
It is.
Yeah, it is, because you're running full throttle the whole time you're undercover and you're operational. You've been there. I do. There's an adrenaline that you have to survive, literally survive within your own self to keep collectively together to be able to make sure that you can, number one, acquire the information, number two, return it alive. Bottom line, those are the two things.
Definitely loosens the bolts to work like that. And you're like, man, this body, this mind of mine, man, it's a mess.
Yeah.
That's a good laydown of everything that you've done, man. I appreciate that. I know we talk about these things and blips and starts on the show. But
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up? I don't want this to go too long, but what
Yeah,
an
no,
interesting story, Hal.
Well, I thank you for that. I'd like to say that it was October 19th of 1994, 3:30 in the afternoon. I had just come out of court, had a contract put on my life, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. My wife served me with divorce papers the day before. I mean, my whole world was collapsing and coming to an end. And I was on my way to parts unknown, getting ready to get on a Conair flight.
Yeah.
And I was in my cell, Pete, and I just dropped down to my knees and I looked up to the sky and I says, I can't take any more. I can't do this. And an inmate walked in, dropped on his knees beside me, put a hand on my shoulder and started praying. And it wasn't but a couple of moments later when another guy did the same thing on the other side of me. And all three of us went in this prayer. And it was in that moment that I felt the shackles of all the grief and anxiety and anger and hatred and everything that I was feeling in life just melted away. And here it is, 31 years later, I've devoted my entire life to serving God. And even after I got out of the feds got me out 4 years early, and I spent another 12 or 13 years active before I got out. I've never walked away from the ministry. I completed seminarial studies in federal prison, became a fellow prison hospice counselor, taking 24 prisoners through the dying process, and all the time cramming for my seminarial studies to graduate seminary while I was in federal prison custody. Week after I got out, I was reordained in Seattle, Washington, February 3rd, 1999 by Bishop LaFall, and ended up until mother passing, his co-pastor and wife, this last year, over 25 years at the same church. I worked in outreach services in the homeless communities. I worked with people that are in trap houses and watching unimaginable things going on with these really young people that'll do literally anything for their drug. And it was a real penance to me because when I was a high-level narcotrafficante, I never saw the streets. I wasn't around anything like that. So it was a real eye-opening experience that God put me through for the purpose of understanding and for the rest of my life to carry a bit of suffering within my soul for what I had done in my younger years. But the message in closing that I want to give is this. When you're doing something wrong, and you're someone who grew up good like I did in a good community and a good family and good moral ethics and good background, but you hit a crossroad in life, good God, take a look at that crossroad before you cross over like I did. I was tantalized by the romance, if you will, of the criminal world, the monetary and power that came with making money. I became blinded and I got away from the good things. And Pete, as my witness of several years, you know how I am as a senior pastor. I'm extremely devoted to the ministry. I'm even making plans, as we were discussing today, about heading over to Kenya to the mission fields under the Archbishop of the country of Kenya, who's been in touch and wants me to come and speak the gospels with him.
Yeah.
So anyway, my message to every one of you is go with the intuitions that rest in your heart that are the good ones, of the right ones. Don't get caught up in the worldly things that put you into a life like I ended up. 35 years of my life was tied up, half of it in the drug cartels and the other half fighting to pay back for what I did. Don't do it to yourself. And with that, I'd like to say God bless you all. Thank you for listening to this testimony. And I hope to God this reaches out and helps somebody out there in the audience. Pete, thank you for doing the show today.
Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today. And I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But, you know, this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego, y vaya con Dios, and go Victors.